The morning sun cast long shadows across the military courtyard as Colonel Michael Harrison adjusted his uniform one final time. Today marked the end of his 30-year career in the United States Army, and the retirement ceremony would officially close a chapter that had defined his entire adult life. His hands, weathered from countless deployments and training exercises, trembled slightly as he prepared for what should have been a routine signing of his discharge papers. The ceremony hall buzzed with activity as fellow officers, family members, and distinguished guests gathered to honor his service. Michael had served in 3 different conflicts, earned numerous medals for valor, and commanded respect from soldiers half his age. His reputation as a fair but demanding leader had preceded him wherever he was stationed, and today's gathering represented testimonials from decades of dedicated service. As he stood before the mahogany desk where his papers awaited, Michael reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He had enlisted as a young man of 18, driven by a sense of duty and adventure that seemed to run in his family's blood. His father had served in Vietnam, his grandfather in World War II, and now Michael was ending a career that had spanned the modern era of military operations. The room fell silent as the presiding general approached with the official documents. Michael had worked under General Patricia Stevens for the past 5 years, and she had become not just a superior officer, but a trusted colleague whose strategic mind and unwavering dedication had earned his deepest respect. She carried herself with the confidence that came from breaking barriers in a male-dominated field, and her presence commanded immediate attention from everyone in the room. General Stevens placed the papers on the desk with ceremonial precision, her movements deliberate and respectful of the significance of the moment. The discharge papers represented more than just a career transition. They symbolized the end of an era for a man who had dedicated his life to serving his country. Michael stepped forward, his polished boots clicking against the marble floor as he approached the desk where his future awaited. The weight of the moment pressed down on him as he reached for the ceremonial pen that would officially mark his transition from active duty to civilian life. Around him, the assembled crowd watched in respectful silence, understanding the gravity of what they were witnessing. This was not just paperwork being signed. It was a warrior laying down his sword after 3 decades of faithful service. Michael's fingers closed around the gold-plated pen, its surface reflecting the overhead lights as he prepared to sign his name for the final time as an active duty officer. The silence in the room was profound, broken only by the subtle sounds of breathing and the distant hum of air conditioning. Everyone present understood they were witnessing the conclusion of a distinguished military career. As he positioned the pen above the signature line, Michael felt a strange mixture of relief and melancholy wash over him. Relief that he had survived a career filled with dangerous missions and difficult decisions, and melancholy for the brotherhood and purpose he was leaving behind. The pen felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried the weight of all his years in uniform. General Stevens stood beside the desk, her presence both official and supportive, as she prepared to witness this final act of Michael's military career. Her uniform was immaculate, her bearing proud, and her expression reflected the solemnity of the occasion. She had overseen many such ceremonies, but each one carried its own emotional weight, especially when honoring an officer of Michael's caliber and experience. The assembled crowd maintained their respectful silence as Michael began to lower the pen toward the paper. This signature would transform him from Colonel Harrison to simply Michael Harrison, citizen. It would end his authority to command troops, his responsibility for life and death decisions, and his identity as a soldier. The transition represented both an ending and a beginning, a transformation that millions of veterans had experienced before him. Just as the pen was about to touch the paper, something caught General Stevens' attention. Her eyes widened slightly and her breath caught in her throat as she noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. The confidence that had carried her through decades of military service suddenly wavered, and she found herself staring at something that transported her back through the years to a different time and place. Michael paused, sensing the sudden tension in the room, unaware that his simple act of reaching for a pen had triggered a cascade of memories and emotions in the woman standing beside him. The moment hung suspended between past and present, between what was supposed to happen and what was about to unfold instead. General Stevens felt the blood drain from her face as her gaze fixed on Michael's left hand. There, catching the ceremonial lighting of the room, was a ring that she recognized with shocking clarity despite the passage of more than 25 years. The simple gold band bore an intricate Celtic knot design, and embedded within its surface was a small emerald that seemed to pulse with memories she had tried desperately to bury. Her mind raced backward, through the decades, to a small town in Ireland where she had spent a summer during her college years. She had been Patricia Murphy then, a young woman studying abroad and working at a local pub to earn money for her education. Those had been magical months filled with laughter, discovery, and a romance that had seemed destined to last forever. The ring she was staring at now had belonged to her first love, her only love. The man she had promised to marry before duty and circumstances tore them apart. Michael remained frozen with the pen in his hand, completely unaware of the emotional storm raging in the woman beside him. He had worn the ring for so many years that he barely noticed it anymore, but it carried a significance that had shaped every relationship he had attempted since. The ring had been a gift from a woman whose memory had haunted him through 3 decades of military service, failed relationships, and lonely nights in foreign countries. Patricia forced herself to breathe steadily as memories flooded back with devastating clarity. She remembered the night he had given her a matching ring, how they had promised to find each other again after her studies were complete. She recalled the weight of his hand in hers as they walked through the Irish countryside, making plans for a future that seemed as certain as the sunrise. Most painfully, she remembered the letter she had written but never sent, explaining why she had chosen military service over love. The silence in the room grew uncomfortable, as both Michael and the assembled guests noticed General Stevens' strange behavior. Her normally composed demeanor had cracked, revealing glimpses of vulnerability that none of her subordinates had ever witnessed. Her hands, which had remained steady through combat situations and high-pressure negotiations, now trembled visibly as she stared at the ring that represented a road not taken. Michael slowly turned his head to look at the general, concern replacing his ceremonial focus. Something in her expression seemed familiar, though he could not quite place why. Her dark eyes, which he had always found striking in their intelligence and determination, now held a depth of emotion that suggested personal recognition rather than professional respect. The way she was looking at his ring specifically made his heart begin to race with an impossible possibility. 25 years earlier, Patricia had made the most difficult decision of her life. Standing in a Dublin airport with tears streaming down her face, she had chosen to honor her commitment to the military academy, rather than follow her heart back to the small Irish town where Michael was waiting for her. She had convinced herself that duty must come before personal happiness, that her dreams of military service were more important than a summer romance. The irony was not lost on her, as she stood in full military regalia, having achieved every goal she had set for herself in those early years. She had broken barriers, earned respect, and carved out a distinguished career in a challenging field. But standing here now, looking at the ring that symbolized everything she had sacrificed for her ambition, she wondered if the cost had been worth paying. Michael's mind began connecting fragments of memory as he studied the general's face with new attention. The curve of her cheek, the way her eyebrows drew together when she was deep in thought, the particular shade of brown in her eyes. These details struck him as hauntingly familiar. But Patricia Murphy, the young woman who had captured his heart in Ireland, had been studying literature and talking about becoming a teacher. The idea that she could be the same person seemed impossible. The assembled crowd began to shift restlessly, unsure whether they should intervene or continue waiting for the ceremony to proceed. Some whispered quietly among themselves, speculating about what could have caused such a dramatic pause in what should have been a routine proceeding. The tension in the room was palpable, and several people wondered if General Stevens was experiencing some kind of medical emergency. Patricia's thoughts raced through the years of wondering what had become of the young man she had loved so completely. She had occasionally searched for news of him, especially in the early years, but Michael Harrison was a common enough name that her efforts had yielded nothing concrete. She had eventually forced herself to stop looking, convinced that he had moved on and probably forgotten about their brief but intense connection. The reality that he had apparently never married, evidenced by the fact that he still wore her ring after all these years, struck her like a physical blow. She had assumed that someone so warm and loving would have found happiness with another woman, that their separation had been just a temporary setback in what would become a full and happy life. The possibility that he had carried their love with him through the decades made her decision to leave seem even more tragic. Michael's grip on the pen loosened as recognition dawned in his eyes. Despite the years and the circumstances and the uniform that had transformed the young woman he had known into this distinguished general, he was beginning to see traces of Patricia Murphy in General Stevens's features. The impossible was becoming possible, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to shift as the present collided with the past in the most unexpected way imaginable. The pen slipped from Michael's fingers and clattered onto the marble floor, the sound echoing through the silent ceremony hall like a gunshot. Every eye in the room turned toward the fallen instrument, but Michael and Patricia remained locked in a gaze that transcended their surroundings. 25 years of separation, success, and carefully buried emotions hung in the air between them, as they recognized each other across the vast distance of time and circumstance. Patricia's professional composure finally cracked completely, as she whispered a single word that only Michael could hear. Mickey. It was the nickname she had given him during those magical summer months, a name that no one else had ever used. The sound of it on her lips after so many years sent shockwaves through both of them, confirming what they had both begun to suspect but hardly dared to believe. Michael's response was equally quiet but filled with decades of longing and unanswered questions. Patty. The name emerged from somewhere deep in his chest, carrying with it the weight of every letter he had written but never sent, every prayer he had whispered for her safety and happiness, every moment he had wondered where life had taken the woman who had owned his heart since he was 23 years old. The assembled guests watched in confused fascination as their distinguished general and retiring colonel appeared to be having some kind of profound personal moment. Whispers began to circulate through the crowd as people speculated about what could possibly explain such an unprecedented break in military protocol. Some wondered if they were witnessing a mental breakdown, while others suspected there might be some hidden history between the two officers. Major Rebecca Thompson, who had served as Michael's aide for the past 3 years, stepped forward tentatively. She had never seen her commanding officer display anything other than complete professional control, and his current state of apparent shock concerned her greatly. The ceremony had clearly gone off script, but she was unsure whether she should intervene or allow whatever was happening to continue playing out. Patricia's mind reeled as she processed the impossible reality before her. The young man who had stolen her heart with his gentle humor and unwavering kindness had grown into this distinguished officer whose reputation for integrity and leadership was legendary throughout their branch of service. They had been serving in the same military for decades, their paths somehow never crossing despite their parallel careers in related fields. The weight of lost opportunities pressed down on both of them as they realized how close they had come to each other over the years without knowing it. Michael had been stationed at bases only hours away from Patricia's assignments on multiple occasions. They had attended some of the same military conferences, served under some of the same higher-ranking officers, and moved through overlapping social and professional circles without ever encountering each other directly. Michael bent slowly to retrieve the fallen pen, using the moment to compose himself and try to process what was happening. His hands shook as he picked up the instrument that was supposed to end one chapter of his life, but instead had opened a door to a past he thought was forever closed. The simple act of signing retirement papers had suddenly become impossibly complicated. As he straightened up, Patricia found her voice enough to address the assembled crowd, though her words came out strained and uncertain. Ladies and gentlemen, I need to request a brief recess in today's ceremony. Please remain seated while Colonel Harrison and I address an urgent matter that has just come to my attention. Her training in crisis management kicked in, allowing her to maintain some semblance of control despite her emotional turmoil. The crowd murmured with curiosity and concern, but discipline and respect for rank kept them in their seats as requested. Family members exchanged worried glances, wondering what could possibly be so urgent that it would interrupt such an important ceremony. Michael's sister Sarah, who had traveled from California to attend the retirement, leaned forward in her chair with growing anxiety about her brother's well-being. Patricia gestured toward a small conference room adjacent to the ceremony hall, and Michael followed her on unsteady legs. The familiar military bearing that had carried him through 3 decades of service seemed to have abandoned him entirely, replaced by the uncertain steps of a man whose world had just shifted on its axis. The confidence and authority he had projected just minutes earlier had been replaced by vulnerability and disbelief. As they entered the private room and Patricia closed the door behind them, the magnitude of their situation began to sink in. They were no longer the young lovers who had been separated by circumstances beyond their control. They were seasoned military officers with established lives, reputations, and responsibilities. The simplicity of their former relationship had been replaced by complexities that neither of them was prepared to navigate. The small conference room felt both intimate and vast as they stood facing each other without the buffer of ceremony and audience. Patricia removed her military cap, revealing hair that was shorter and grayer than Michael remembered, but still recognizable as belonging to the woman he had loved. The years had added lines around her eyes and a gravitas to her bearing, but underneath the military polish he could still see traces of the young woman who had laughed at his jokes and shared her dreams with him under Irish skies. Michael's voice came out rough with emotion as he finally found words. "I never stopped looking for you. I never stopped hoping I would see you again." The admission hung between them like a bridge across the years, connecting their past to this impossible present. Patricia's eyes filled with tears she had not allowed herself to shed in decades, and for the first time since putting on a uniform, she felt like the young woman she had once been rather than the general she had become. Patricia's carefully maintained composure finally shattered as tears began streaming down her face. "I wanted to find you too," she whispered, her voice breaking with years of suppressed regret. "I wrote you letters, Mickey. Hundreds of letters that I never sent because I thought it would be cruel to both of us. I thought I was doing the right thing by letting you move on with your life." The admission tore from her throat like a confession that had been waiting decades to escape. Michael stepped closer, his military training warring with his desire to comfort the woman he had never forgotten. "Move on?" he repeated with a mixture of disbelief and pain. "Patty, I have worn your ring every single day for 25 years. I kept the engagement ring I bought for you locked in a safe deposit box because I could never bring myself to return it. Moving on was never an option when half of my heart was missing." The revelation that he had bought an engagement ring struck Patricia like a physical blow. She remembered their last night together in Ireland, how he had seemed nervous and excited about something he wanted to tell her. She had assumed it was just sadness about her departure, never imagining that he had been planning to propose. The weight of what might have been pressed down on her shoulders like a lead blanket. "I was so afraid," Patricia admitted, sinking into one of the conference room chairs as her legs could no longer support her. "I was afraid that if I stayed I would lose myself completely. I thought I had to choose between loving you and becoming the person I was meant to be. I convinced myself that duty was more important than happiness, that serving my country was worth any personal sacrifice." Michael sat across from her, close enough to see the pain etched in every line of her face. "And what did that choice give you, Patty? What was worth losing us?" His question was not accusatory, but genuinely curious, as if he was trying to understand a decision that had shaped both their lives so profoundly. The bitterness he might have felt had been worn away by years of wondering and worrying about her welfare. "It gave me everything I thought I wanted," she replied with a hollow laugh. "Rank, respect, accomplishment, security. I broke barriers and proved that women could succeed in combat leadership roles. I influenced policy and saved lives and earned medals that gathered dust in my apartment. But it never gave me peace, Mickey. It never filled the hole that leaving you created in my soul." The honesty between them was raw and painful, but also liberating after decades of carrying their secrets alone. Michael reached across the small table that separated them and gently took her hand, marveling at how perfectly it still fit in his, despite the years and changes that had transformed them both. Her hands bore small scars from training exercises and field operations, but they were still unmistakably the hands that had once held his face while promising to love him forever. "I need you to know something," Michael said quietly, his thumb tracing the familiar lines of her palm. "I never blamed you for leaving. I was hurt and confused, and lost for a long time, but I never blamed you. I knew you were struggling with something bigger than just us, and I respected your right to make that choice even if I didn't understand it at the time. Patricia's tears renewed at his words, touched by a generosity she knew she did not deserve. I blame myself enough for both of us, she whispered. Every promotion, every achievement, every moment of professional success was tainted by the knowledge that I had thrown away the best thing that ever happened to me. I used to lie awake at night wondering if you were happy, if you had found someone else, if you even remembered me. Remember you? Michael's voice held a note of incredulous tenderness. Patty, you were woven into every day of my life. I chose assignments based on whether they might somehow lead me back to you. I turned down relationships because no one could compare to what we had. I built my entire career around serving others because you taught me that love means putting someone else's welfare before your own happiness. The irony of their situation was almost overwhelming. They had both dedicated their lives to military service, following parallel paths that had somehow never intersected, despite serving the same country and sharing the same values. Patricia had risen through the ranks by proving herself in increasingly challenging positions, while Michael had built a reputation for integrity and leadership that earned him respect throughout the service. Do you remember what you used to say about fate? Patricia asked suddenly, a tremulous smile breaking through her tears. You said that some things were meant to happen, and that if we were supposed to be together, the universe would find a way to make it happen. I used to think you were being naive, but maybe you were right all along. Michael remembered those conversations with crystal clarity. They had spent hours walking through Irish meadows, discussing philosophy and dreams and the mysterious ways that life unfolded. His young heart had been full of certainty about their destiny, while her practical mind had been filled with doubts and fears about the future. Neither of them could have imagined that their reunion would come at his retirement ceremony 25 years later. Maybe we needed these years apart to become the people we needed to be, he suggested gently. Maybe we had to learn how to serve something bigger than ourselves before we could serve each other properly. Maybe the timing is finally right for us to find our way back to what we lost. His words carried hope mixed with uncertainty, as if he was afraid to believe too strongly in the possibility of a second chance. Outside the conference room, the assembled guests continued to wait with growing curiosity and concern. The unusual interruption had stretched far beyond what anyone would consider normal, and speculation about what could possibly explain such a dramatic break in protocol continued to circulate through the crowd. But inside their private sanctuary, Michael and Patricia were discovering that some loves are strong enough to survive decades of separation, misunderstanding, and regret. Patricia stood up abruptly and began pacing the small conference room, her military training kicking in as she tried to process the emotional chaos through logical analysis. Mickey, we can't just pretend the last 25 years didn't happen. We're different people now. I'm about to take command of the European division, and you're retiring to civilian life. We have responsibilities, expectations, reputations to consider. Michael watched her pace with a mixture of admiration and sadness, recognizing the internal battle between her heart and her sense of duty that had driven her away from him so many years ago. Are you still trying to choose between love and career, Patty? After all these years, are you still convinced that you can't have both? His question was gentle but pointed, cutting straight to the core of her fears. It's not that simple anymore, she replied, stopping her pacing to face him directly. I'm 50 years old, Mickey. I've built a life based on independence and self-reliance. I don't know if I remember how to let someone else matter more than my mission. I don't know if I'm capable of the kind of vulnerability that love requires after spending decades building walls to protect myself. Michael stood and approached her slowly, as if she were a wounded animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. I'm not asking you to abandon everything you've built, Patty. I'm not the same naive young man who thought love could conquer every obstacle without effort or compromise. I've learned patience and understanding through years of loneliness and disappointment. I know that real love means supporting each other's dreams, not demanding that someone sacrifice everything for your happiness. His words struck her deeply because they addressed the fear she had never spoken aloud. She had always assumed that loving someone completely meant losing herself entirely. That commitment meant giving up the identity she had fought so hard to establish. The possibility that love could actually strengthen rather than diminish her had never occurred to her, despite watching successful military couples throughout her career. "I'm scared," she admitted in a whisper so quiet he had to lean closer to hear her. "I'm scared that I don't know how to be anything other than General Stevens anymore. I'm scared that Patricia Murphy died somewhere along the way, and all that's left is this uniform and these responsibilities. I'm scared that you'll realize I'm not the woman you remembered and loved." Michael reached up to touch her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Patty, the woman I fell in love with, was brave enough to dream of serving her country despite every obstacle in her path. She was strong enough to make impossible choices and smart enough to succeed in a world that didn't want to make room for her. That woman didn't die. She just learned how to wear armor to protect herself, but I can still see her in your eyes." The tenderness in his touch and words began to crack the emotional armor she had worn for so long. Patricia found herself leaning into his hand, accepting comfort from another person for the first time in decades. The sensation was both foreign and achingly familiar, like remembering how to speak a language she had forced herself to forget. "What are you suggesting we do?" she asked, her voice stronger now but still uncertain. "Even if we wanted to try again, the logistics alone seem impossible. You're retiring to Montana to be near your sister, and I have at least 5 more years of active duty ahead of me. We're not kids anymore, Mickey. We can't just run away together and figure it out as we go." "No, we can't," he agreed with a smile. "But we're also not the same powerless young people who let circumstances separate us the first time. We have resources now, connections, the wisdom that comes from experience. If we want to make this work, we can find a way to make it work. The question is whether we're both brave enough to try." The word brave resonated with Patricia because courage had defined her entire career. She had faced enemy fire, made life and death decisions, and stood up to discrimination and prejudice throughout her rise through the ranks. But the prospect of opening her heart again felt more dangerous than any battlefield she had ever encountered. A soft knock on the conference room door interrupted their moment of connection. Major Thompson's voice came through the panel. "General Stevens, sir? The guests are getting restless, and Colonel Harrison's family is asking if there's a medical emergency. Do you need me to postpone the ceremony or call for assistance?" Patricia and Michael looked at each other, suddenly remembering that their private revelation was taking place in the middle of a public ceremony, with dozens of witnesses waiting for an explanation. The reality of their situation crashed back over them as they realized that whatever decision they made about their future would have to be made quickly and in full view of their colleagues, friends, and family members. "Give us 5 more minutes." "Major," Patricia called back, her general's authority returning to her voice. "Tell everyone that we're addressing an urgent administrative matter, and the ceremony will resume shortly." She turned back to Michael, knowing that they were about to have to rejoin the world and face the consequences of their unexpected reunion. Michael straightened his uniform and checked his appearance in the reflection of the window, trying to compose himself for the return to public scrutiny. "Whatever we decide about the future, Patty, I need you to know that finding you again today feels like a miracle. Even if this is all we get, just knowing that you're alive and successful and that you never completely forgot about us, that's more than I dared hope for when I woke up this morning." Patricia nodded, understanding that they were approaching a moment that would determine whether their story ended with this unexpected reunion or began a completely new chapter. The weight of decision pressed down on her shoulders as she prepared to return to the ceremony hall, where their future would be decided in front of everyone who mattered in their professional lives. Patricia took a deep breath and squared her shoulders, transforming back into the commanding general as she prepared to face the assembled crowd. But just before reaching for the door handle, she turned back to Michael with sudden determination. "Mickey, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. If I asked you to postpone your retirement and consider a position in the European division, would you think I was being selfish?" Michael's eyes widened at the unexpected question. "Are you offering me a job, General Stevens?" he asked with a slight smile, deliberately using her rank to acknowledge the professional dimension of what she was suggesting. The possibility hadn't occurred to him, but it offered a solution to their geographical problem that seemed almost too good to be true. "Colonel Harrison, you have expertise in logistics and personnel management that would be invaluable to our operations overseas. Your record of service and leadership capabilities make you an ideal candidate for several positions that are currently unfilled in my command structure." Patricia's voice carried the authority of her rank, but her eyes held the hope of a woman who had just found a way to keep love and duty from being mutually exclusive. The genius of her solution struck him immediately. Working under her command would allow them to be together, while maintaining their professional integrity and serving their country's interests. It would also give them time to rebuild their relationship gradually, without the pressure of having to make life-altering decisions immediately after their unexpected reunion. "I would need to withdraw my retirement papers," he said thoughtfully, "and there would probably be questions about the sudden change of plans, especially after today's drama. Are you prepared to handle the scrutiny and speculation that would come with hiring an officer whose retirement ceremony you just interrupted?" Patricia's smile was the first genuinely confident expression she had worn since recognizing his ring. "Mickey, I've spent my entire career proving that I can handle whatever challenges come my way. A few gossips questioning my personnel decisions are the least of my concerns. The question is whether you're willing to trust me with your career after I already broke your heart once." The vulnerability in her question touched him deeply. She was offering him not just a professional opportunity, but a chance to rebuild what they had lost, and she was doing it despite her own fears and uncertainties. The courage it took for her to make such an offer, knowing that she was risking both their careers and their hearts, was exactly the kind of bravery that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. "General Stevens," he said formally, "I would be honored to serve under your command and contribute to the mission of the European Division. However, I have one condition." His serious tone made her tense slightly, wondering what complication he was about to introduce. "I want permission to court you properly this time, following all appropriate protocols and regulations regarding relationships between officers of different ranks." Her laughter was bright and genuine, the sound of a woman who had just realized that sometimes life offers second chances to those brave enough to seize them. "Colonel Harrison, I believe that request falls outside my official authority, but Patricia Murphy would very much like to accept that invitation. We'll need to be careful about maintaining professional boundaries and following proper procedures, but I think we're both old enough and experienced enough to handle that challenge." They stood facing each other in the small conference room, no longer the separated lovers they had been that morning, but not yet the reunited couple they might become. The path ahead would require patience, discretion, and careful navigation of military regulations, but for the first time in 25 years, they had hoped that their story might have a happy ending after all. "Are you ready to go back out there and face the music?" Patricia asked, gesturing toward the door and the crowd of curious witnesses beyond it. "Because we're going to have some explaining to do, and people are going to ask questions we're not ready to answer completely." Michael nodded and moved to stand beside her, close enough to offer support, but maintaining the professional distance that would be expected of them in public. "We'll figure it out as we go, just like we did when we were young. The difference is that this time, we're not going to let fear or duty or anyone else's expectations keep us apart." Patricia opened the door and stepped back into the ceremony hall, where dozens of faces turned toward them with curiosity and concern. The whispers died down as she approached the podium with Michael beside her, both of them wearing expressions of professional composure that gave no hint of the emotional upheaval they had just experienced. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia announced in her clear, authoritative voice, "I apologize for the delay in today's ceremony. Colonel Harrison and I needed to discuss an urgent personnel matter that has just come to my attention." She paused, looking out over the assembled crowd with the confidence of someone who had learned to command respect in any situation. "Due to critical staffing needs in the European Division, I am offering Colonel Harrison a position that would require him to postpone his retirement and accept assignment overseas. This opportunity arose unexpectedly, and we needed to address it immediately given the timing constraints involved." Her explanation was truthful without being complete, giving the crowd enough information to understand the situation without revealing the personal dimensions of their decision. Michael stepped forward to address the gathering, his voice steady and sure despite the dramatic changes his life had just undergone. "After careful consideration, I have decided to accept General Stevens' offer and withdraw my retirement papers. I believe I can continue to serve our country's interests in this new capacity, and I'm honored to have been selected for such an important assignment." The crowd erupted in surprised murmurs and scattered applause as people processed this unexpected turn of events. Michael's sister Sarah looked shocked but pleased, having worried about her brother's adjustment to civilian life. The other officers present nodded approvingly, understanding the appeal of continuing to serve in a position that would utilize his skills and experience. As the ceremony was formally concluded and people began to disperse, Michael caught Patricia's eye and smiled. They had found each other again across the vast distances of time and circumstance, and they had found a way to choose both love and duty. The ring that had triggered their reunion remained on his finger, but now it symbolized not just the past they had shared, but the future they were brave enough to build together.